The following is a production of the University of Minnesota, driven to discover.
Well, hi, this is David Arundel, your host for the Lessons Learned Educator Stories podcast. Thanks for spending some time with me today. In this first podcast episode, I provide a short overview of this new podcast and invite your involvement in sharing your stories. The subtitle for this podcast is Lessons to Repeat Successes and Lessons to Avoid Failures. When I retired after 40 years of teaching an introductory college global history course in 2019, I've been connected with my colleagues as they have moved into the online world in response to the pandemic. I've been so impressed with their grace and strength as they were required to do things they were never trained to do with the move to online learning and new pedagogies. It isn't just simply about the technology, it's probably more about the new pedagogies and strategies and learning activities that they were engaging in. They displayed inventiveness and ingenuity as they made the software programs and the curriculum work in a new environment that they didn't anticipate working in. I've also listened and felt their expressions of exhaustion and pain from the experience as well. As we start this podcast in April of 2021, many of these educators are looking forward to the end of the academic term. The academic term, at least the year in the U.S., and hopefully the last time that they're ever going to have to deal with being forced to work in an online environment under these kinds of conditions. They look forward to a return to normalcy in September of 2021. Educators write curriculum reports and institutional documents while managing programs with student employees often. Most do not write for publication or present at conferences. It's hard enough to write, submit, revise, resubmit, and continue the revision process until these things are published. These gifted educators are dog-tired and need the rest that awaits in summer for many of the U.S. educators. For those in other parts of the world, it's another half of a year before that rest may occur. The only thing more tragic about experiencing this year is not sharing the painful lessons learned with other colleagues so that they don't have to learn them the hard way. A few will write articles and books about the experience, but because of the publication cycle, they're not going to appear for years. Some will give presentations at conferences, but many educators are not going to have the institutional nor the personal funds to hear those sessions and the lessons learned by attending the conferences in a city far away. This is why I created this podcast. It's a place for educators to share their stories of the past year or of any year and the lessons that were learned. Some of you may remember that during 2020, I surveyed managers of study group programs and asked them to share their lessons learned. That was collected into a document and posted online. Nearly 1,500 people have downloaded that document for the lessons from the people in the field who are the experts. In case you missed it, send me an email and I'll send you a copy. I did something very similar for Gear Up and Trio programs last year, 2020, with what they were doing to take their programs online. I created a website and a directory of practices which were contributed by the people in the field. I just simply acted as an organizer, and that was shared online. In case you need a copy of that, send me an email. That'll be provided at the end of the podcast. This podcast is a place for a leisurely conversation with me that lasts maybe 10 minutes or so. The person decides what lessons to share. They can share about successes and what were the key ingredients. They can also share about things that did not go as they had hoped and what were the lessons learned on what went wrong and how it could be better next time. We need to share these stories before the start of the next semester. Our fellow educators could benefit so greatly from your wisdom and difficult experiences. If you're interested in briefly sharing your experiences and lessons learned, send an email to me at my last name, Arendale, Arendale, at UMN for University of Minnesota.edu. Arendale at UMN.edu. I'll follow up with more information and a list of some potential questions. Then we could get together through a Zoom meeting at a time that works for you. I keep the audio recording and discard the video. I edit the audio to make us both look really good. I'll send you an email when the session is posted to the podcast. It's as simple as that. Send me an email with more questions that you have about the opportunity. Well, thanks for consideration of my request on behalf of the larger education community. Podcasting is on the rise. More people are listening. You are. That's how you're listening to this episode. But a lot more of your colleagues are getting into podcasting. And I think this is a great way for us to be able to share the stories that have been learned so painfully, either in the past year or in previous years. The education community needs to hear your voice and the lessons that you could share. Thanks for listening today.